At a recent Nintendo Direct, Sony revealed a remaster of Patapon 1 and 2 coming to all contemporary systems, and it's for some reason being published by Bandai Namco of all companies. Don't get me wrong, this is awesome news, but it reminded me of something. Remember when in January of last year Sony dropped the random video announcing a Patapon anime? If you don't, then don't worry, most people I asked forgot about it as well. Either way, in that same video they also announced a live-action Gravity Rush movie. Remembering all that actually made me think a lot about that series again. It'll never not upset me how Sony practically tossed it aside and then threw it to an audience that clearly lacked love for this kind of game. But you know what? It really stuck with me. It's the kind of game that you really don't see anymore these days. So today, I'd like to talk about what might just be Sony's most underappreciated franchise of all time. Gravity Rush, or Gravity Daze, really started with one man, Keiichiro Toyama. He actually came up with this idea way back when he first started working on video games for Konami. Eventually, he got the opportunity to make his own game, that turning into a small niche little title called Silent Hill. And honestly, if you were to ask him today, I would not be shocked if he claimed that this might just have been the worst thing that could have possibly happened to him. The game did incredibly well, and he instantly became labeled as a horror director. So when he and a lot of the Silent Hill team left Konami and joined Sony Japan Studio in 1999, it really didn't take long before they got put to work on a new horror game, that turning into Forbidden Siren. It got a sequel, and then a reboot for the PS3. But finally, after Blood Curse in 2008, horror games started to die out at the time, and so he finally got to make the game he's always wanted to make. Starting out as a PS3 game called Gravity, which was supposed to be aimed at a hardcore action game audience, and then it eventually morphed into Gravity Rush for the PS Vita. Allegedly, it's because he liked the gyro controls on the system, but realistically speaking, Sony probably told him to do it because they needed at least one solid title for the Vita. At least he got to make it at all, I guess. The game did end up getting a remaster on the PS4 in the same year as the second game came out though, and I'll mostly be using footage from that version for cutscenes and the like. But for the gameplay, I'll mostly be trying to use my own footage from the Vita version, as that's the only one I can capture. So don't get confused if the quality of the game's visuals gets worse or better depending on the clip in this video. I'd also like to thank whoever's footage I stole for this. If I had to put Gravity Rush into an established genre, I would fail. Technically speaking, it is an action game, but that description never really sat right with me. There's honestly nothing quite like it, so before I start to give myself a headache trying to explain it, let's start with the setup. The game starts with Kat, an amnesiac girl who runs into a weird spirit cat she later calls Dusty that allows her to manipulate gravity. From there, she gets involved in the affairs of the people of Hexaville, the town she wakes up in, and helps them as a local hero of sorts. Visually, the game is gorgeous. Everything has a very distinct cel-shaded look to it, and the entire game bases its aesthetics on comic books, but still with a certain Japanese flair to it. There's only very few actual in-engine cutscenes, as most of them are presented in the form of comic book panels that you slide through. The games actually do this thing that Panzer Dragoon does, wherein everyone speaks an entirely made-up language that's sort of loosely supposed to sound like French. A lot of the game's aesthetic direction, including the character designs, were handled by one Shunsuke Saito, who hadn't really done anything of the sort previously, and still hasn't to this day, and he seriously knocked it out of the park. Kat is genuinely one of my favorite character designs in any video game, and everything is just so vibrant, and there's a really fun energy to everything in this game, and each area has a really distinct atmosphere to it as well. And then there's the gameplay. At its core, the game is all about gravity shifting. The way shifting works is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Instead of flying around or having free movement, you completely alter your own field of gravity into whatever direction you're facing, and you'll actively start falling into that direction. If you hold down X, you can also fall faster, and if you hit any object, Kat will be able to move on it as if she was on solid ground. And I really do mean any object. Clocks, trash cans, lampposts, you name it. As long as it doesn't move, you can shift onto it. You can also stop mid-air and float in place to readjust yourself. Shifting also doesn't just affect you, but also the people around you, causing NPCs to be pulled up and flung around the air against your or their will. Weird comparison, I know, but it kind of reminds me of how you can just throw around any NPC you want like a ragdoll in Crystal Chronicles the Crystal Bearers. Whenever you shift, it'll start draining your gravity gauge. When it runs out, you'll immediately start falling in normal gravity until it recharges. This usually takes a couple of seconds, but it can be upgraded to go faster. You do this by using these crystals that you find all over the world. You can also use them to upgrade your health, speed, attacks, and any other abilities. It's hard to put into words, but shifting makes just getting around the world inherently really fun. There's a certain weight to everything, and getting the hang of it is immensely satisfying. Really, the best comparison I could come up with is, you know that sense of freedom you get when you really master the swinging in Spider-Man games? Think that, but you've got a lot more freedom. Later on, you also get more abilities like the gravity slide, which essentially lets you dash around any surface really quickly. It's really fun, though ironically enough, there's not a single instance in the entire game where it is necessary. Honestly, my favorite part is just roaming around the world, exploring everything, and doing any side missions that let me mess around with the shifting. And that's good, because that's generally what you're going to be doing a lot of the time. The story is split into multiple individual levels, or chapters, that mostly all take place on the same map, so some do have you entering different rift worlds, which are designated areas with unique conditions, like greatly limiting your shifting abilities or taking them away outright. Every time you finish one, you also unlock a new district in Hexaville, and they're all very distinct from one another, both aesthetically and tonally. Just comparing Old Noir, the business district, district to Plajun, the red light district, which for some reason also has a school in it, is seriously a night and day difference. And all of this is greatly enhanced by Koei Tanaka's incredible music. He seems to come up a lot in my videos for some reason. I mean, I use the Alundra soundtrack way too often, and God knows I've made too many videos on Sakura Wars. And yet, out of all of his work, at least of the stuff that I've seen and played, the Gravity Rush games have far and away my favorite work of his to date. Every track is really distinct and complements the mood of its area perfectly. Without it, a key element of this game's atmosphere would seriously feel missing. And now that we've covered all of the stuff that I really love, let's talk about the problems, because Gravity Rush 1's kind of rough. And arguably its biggest issue is the combat. It's really boring. On the ground you have a very basic free-hit combo, you can drop kick enemies, and you can slide kick by dodging before an attack, and you know, that's pretty much it. And ironically enough, for a game all about gravity, landing attacks lacks any and all weight. What doesn't help is that the only real way to hurt the enemies is to attack their big glowing weak points, which can be a real chore to hit sometimes. While shifting combat becomes a little bit better, but not by much. Your go-to attack is going to be shifting and then using the gravity kick right into the enemy's weak spot, since that one has an insanely generous aim assist. And since enemies like moving around a lot, it's incredibly helpful. Later on you also get some special moves, being a super dive kick, a small AoE that deals continuous damage, and just the ability to throw a bunch of rocks at enemies. Whenever you do use one, all three of them become unavailable until their cooldown wears off. There's no way to speed this up, you can only use them again when they feel like it, so often endgame encounters just devolve into waiting for your special ability to recharge and using it again. Technically you can also throw any objects in the area by forming a small gravity bubble around you, which lets you carry anything in it around with you, and you sometimes even have to carry around people or objects to certain locations. But the problem is that doing this in combat is really clunky. Unfortunately, this also leads me to another big issue with this game. While the first half is full of really creative uses of the shifting, like a stealth section where you have to avoid being spotted by guards, which you do by shifting around the walls and floor to get by unnoticed, the latter half instead shifts focus almost entirely on combat and fetch quests that make you carry shit from point A to point B. And of course, this is also one of those games that instead of making new, harder enemies as the game goes on, just shoves a million in your face and gradually raises their health and damage output. So some of the late game fights go on forever. Some of them also start spamming projectiles, which can get really irritating too. Sure, you can dodge out of the way, but while shifting, this completely kills your momentum, and in the remaster you dodge by pressing R2, but in the original Vita version you dodge by swiping the touchscreen into whatever direction you want to dodge in. I don't know if you've ever held a Vita or a PSP, but doing this is incredibly fucking annoying when you're currently in the middle of a fight. Because of this, I'd often just choose to not dodge at all and tank the damage instead, rather than trying to and getting hit anyway because I didn't swipe fast enough. But even then, despite these issues, you'll still have access to a lot of the side missions which you want to do, most of which being pretty fun. Personally, I really liked the races in the first Spy Pack DLC mission, but I guess this only really leaves one thing unaddressed, the story. I've been trying to avoid talking about it as much as possible, primarily because the story is kind of terrible. Look, I love Toyama's work, and truth be told, I haven't gotten around to playing Slitterhead yet, because I think my PC might genuinely explode if I try to, but if there's one thing they all have in common, it's that the stories in them are all consistently a total fucking mess, either being really hard to follow or complete nonsense. I mean seriously, how the fuck are you going to try and explain Kiyoya's default ending in Siren 1 without sounding like a fucking madman? Is this spoilers? I don't even know what's going on here and I beat the game twice. Gravity Rush, despite not having actually been written by him, with him only giving the writers the initial story concept, somehow manages to be both. Basically nothing that happens in the first several chapters actually matters, as it's more of a standalone thing entirely setting up Kat and her relationship with the town and its people, and then there's a complete tonal shift halfway through where the plot goes into a completely different direction, before shitting you back out where you started in the endgame by forcing you into a 1-year time skip followed by a couple of boss fights and an ending so abrupt that I genuinely thought I got a bad ending on my first run. But no, turns out it's just like that, with nothing being resolved at all whatsoever. Have a cliffhanger ending instead, cause why not? And that's Gravity Rush, a small but very ambitious game that, had it been given more time in the oven and a better system without forced touch control gimmicks, could have been phenomenal. But oh well, that's what the sequel's for, isn't it? But before we get to the second game, let's talk about Overture. This was a 2-part animated short made to promote Gravity Rush 2 and bridge the gap between the two games. Both parts are incredibly light on plot, with the first taking place sometime during 2 and basically being little more than a big fight scene with some fun banter, while the second leads into the second game proper. Everyone still speaks in the made-up language and the actual fighting is animated pretty decently, though it fails to convey the actual weight and heft of the shifting. Not that I expected it to, but I'm pointing it out anyway. Unfortunately, some of the less actiony scenes are genuine slideshows. I mean, what the fuck is this? But despite that, it's still a pretty fun watch that I would definitely recommend if you've played the games. And so we get to Gravity Rush 2. This game is by no means perfect, but it's still one of my favorite games to ever come out of Sony. And I can't say this lightly considering that I hold games like Ape Escape 3 or Shadow of the Colossus and Forbidden Siren 2 in extremely high regard in their respective genres. At the end of Overture, Kat and her rival turned friend Raven and her cop friend Sid get sucked into a gravity rift and shat out in another world. And right off the bat, basically everything I praised about the first game is even better here. Saito has taken over completely as the full-on art director, and so aesthetically the game is much sharper and ends up looking a lot less blurry for it, with obviously massive improvements to the models and textures and whatnot. The music is as good as ever, and even the environments are even better than before, with both the new rift areas and cities being extremely fun to explore. The sheer scale of everything in this game is almost more than thrice that of the first game, and it's an absolute joy to just shift around. Powering up Kat now also actively unlocks new skills, and this helps a lot with making the combat more interesting. What also helps is that it generally feels a lot heftier than before, due in part to the new style system. Taking a note out of Devil May Cry's book, you can now swap between 3 different fighting styles on the fly. The first is the normal one from the first game that plays pretty much the same. The second is the lunar style, which makes Kat a lot lighter, and so she slows down heavily while shifting, but when fighting on the ground this makes her much more agile. Consequently, the other new style, Jupiter, makes her way heavier, so on the ground she's way slower but her attacks hit much harder, while shifting makes her so much faster that it's hard to control. I absolutely love this, as the effects of either style completely inverts depending on whether you're shifting or on solid ground, and it allows for some extremely fun maneuvers. They also added a bunch of new enemy types which are way more fun to deal with than the Nevi, though they do still show up occasionally. So yeah, the combat is actually fun now. Even the variety of everything has been expanded greatly. There's several major areas to explore, and the map is generally so much bigger with a much bigger focus on set pieces than the first game ever had. One moment you're fighting, and then the next you have a really cute opera scene with Kat singing about a red apple. Things often feel like they just happen, but there's this wonderful energy to it all, and it makes it hard to not have a good time. There also used to be online features, which I'm told were pretty fun, but I never tried them when I had the chance, and now they're gone. Always a shame when that happens, but it is what it is. So far everything sounds great, right? I mean really, there's almost nothing that this game doesn't do better than the first. Well, unfortunately, almost is kind of a keyword here. For all its improvements, the game is held back by 2 major issues. The first is performance. While the first game and its remaster ran at 60 FPS, 2 instead sticks to 30 because of its higher fidelity visuals. This would be fine if it could actually keep those, but much like Bloodborne, you're really mostly playing at 25, sometimes even less. And of course Sony decided to never have any improved performance updates for it on the PS4 Pro. The other issue is, as you've probably guessed, the story. Look, I love these characters. Kat is an extremely charming protagonist, and her dynamic with Raven and Sid is extremely fun, but the plot is somehow even more disjointed than the first. It's split into 3 major, almost entirely disconnected acts. Act 1 takes place in this new universe, Act 2 is back in Hexaville, and Act 3 is in the post-game, which follows up on a singular setup thing from the first game, which you probably forgot about. If you're expecting any sort of resolution to the major plot lines that didn't go anywhere in the first game, then please play the Raven DLC campaign, which somehow retcons itself. I really don't want to get into it, it's stupid. That DLC is actually really fun, but the plot is somehow even worse than the main game. Either way, Act 3 is easily the lower point of this game, and pretty much encompasses my biggest issues with it. While the first was too short and ended too abruptly, 2 is too long and feels like it should have ended after Act 2. By the time you get there, it feels like the game seriously ran out of steam and used up all of its best ideas. It's basically the same exact issue that the last few chapters of the first game had, except that as opposed to the last hour of a brisk 6 to 7 hour game, here it's 10 of a solid 30-hour game. And it can get really repetitive. And yet, those are seriously the only issues I have with this game. It's an absolutely wonderful experience that represents the last burning embers of creativity at Sony, and it still remains as one of my favorite things to ever come out of that company. Unfortunately, Gravity Rush 2 was a complete financial disaster. Everyone who played it really liked it, and it got great reviews across the board, but unfortunately it was doomed to fail from the start. For a myriad of factors, really. For one, let's look at the most acclaimed and well-selling titles on the PS4. God of War, Last of Us, Horizon, Spider-Man, Uncharted. All massive cinematic AAA titles. And as unfortunate as it is, the console's player base just did not care at all for this kind of lower-budget gameplay-first type of game. What makes it even sadder is that the massive success of Astrobot kind of proves to me that the PS5 audience would have appreciated this game a lot more. But that wasn't the only issue. Sony practically sent the game to die. It got released in early January, and releasing anything right after the big holiday season just ended is always a terrible idea, especially if you give it no marketing at all. I mean, for fuck's sake, it wasn't even featured at Sony's E3 2016 presentation. There was no chance in hell that this game would ever do well. And that's honestly why I think that these games need a PC release more than anything else on Sony's exclusivity catalog, as that's the only way that they'll be able to have a resurgence and finally find an audience that will resonate with them, even if it's years after the fact. Something similar happened to Psychonauts after all. Unfortunately, Gravity Rush 2 was also one of the last embers of Japan's studio as a whole. After this, they only made a small handful of games before being unceremoniously killed off in 2020. The only part of them that's still around is Team Asobi, who are handling the Astrobot games. Team Siren, Toyama's team responsible for Gravity Rush and Forbidden Siren, was disbanded, though most of them went on to join Toyama's new studio, Bokeh Games. Toyama's first game under that new company being Slitherhead, an action horror game. It's clear from a statement that he released after Microsoft shut down Tango Gameworks, the developers of Hi-Fi Rush, that he blames Gravity Rush's failure entirely on people seeing him as a horror director, so him making Slitherhead feels more like an obligation than anything else. And wouldn't you know it, Slitherhead was also a complete commercial failure. So where does that leave Gravity Rush? Well, like I mentioned at the start of the video, they're making a movie out of it. I'm not even going to pretend that I have any hope for it whatsoever. The story was always the worst part of these games, and them making it live action isn't doing it any favors. And let's be real, everybody already knows how the story's gonna go. The film drops, it flops because it sucks, and Sony goes, oh well, I guess nobody cares for the series, you're never getting those games remastered ever, womp womp, have more Horizon slop, why don't ya? It's a damn shame, and that's just how it is though. But hey, if there's a silver lining to it, then it's that PS4 emulation is making incredible strides, and give it a couple years, and I think both Gravity Rush games will be perfectly playable on it. Hell, remastered basically already is. If Sony won't make these games more accessible to an audience who cares, then I'm glad that at least someone out there is, even if just indirectly. And thus ends my look at the Gravity Rush series. A duology that deserved so much more, from a creative who really just needs a break at this point. If you enjoyed the video, then a like and a subscription would be really appreciated. Comments too. You have no idea how much they do for the algorithm. I generally try to reply to every comment, so if you want to talk about stuff even completely unrelated to this video, just let me know. Other than that, I also have a Ko-fi, where you can donate some money to help me pay the bills, clear debts, and save up so I can upgrade my PC and microphone, which are still running 2012 hardware. Anything helps, trust me. With all of that said, I wish you all a wonderful morning, day, evening, or night. Cheers.